So even though the textbook doesn't go any further than Lenski, I do think it's important for us to think about what other theorists who came after him might be saying about the structure of Western society, in particular the United States. So now remember, we've already covered the elements of social structure from a historical perspective, the different stages that societies in the West may have gone through in the past, and the intervention of the Industrial Revolution and how that changed the structures of society. Remember also that we talked about elements being either at the macro level with the work of Durkheim, Tönnies, Lenski, or at the micro level with the work of Erving Goffman. We also defined the structure as patterns that endure over time and become embedded in the fabric of society. Remember, one of those very basic questions about society that theorists are trying to get to is, how does a social structure get built and maintained? So this particular brief lecture is going to cover the work of a contemporary theorist by the name of Peter Frase, but we have to go back to understand how Frase gets to where he is today. And his work comes from a conflict perspective. So we go all the way back to the work of Karl Marx, and we consider his contribution. Remember, Marx said that everything in a society develops based on its economy. And so he sees the Industrial Revolution and the shift from a feudal system to a capitalist system as being somewhat problematic, because he sees the power of the capitalist system as residing in the hands of very few people. In other words, very few powerful people have control of the economy. And according to Marx, if they have control of the economy, they then have control of every other structure that develops in that society and how it develops. They control the government, the institution of family, religion, education, the culture of that society, and so on. So Marx was a little bit concerned about how this capitalist society would play itself out over time. Now, Marx, along with his contemporary Engels, said that conflict can be a means for change in a society. When things become unequally distributed, those social resources, for example, housing or jobs or money or clothing, anything, access to medicine, any of that, when it becomes imbalanced, conflict becomes a means to shift the balance and make everything work well for most people again. So for Marx, when the structure is not balanced, conflict occurs, and for Marx this is a positive type of conflict. So for him in his lifetime, this was the struggle of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. You can also use the terms the haves and the have-nots. The bourgeoisie, or the haves, are the people who control the means of production. They own the factories, they distribute the jobs, they hand out the paychecks, this kind of thing. And the proletariat are the have-nots, the people who have to work for the people who own the means of production. For Marx, what he theorized was that in a modern society, this would increase levels of alienation for the proletariat. In other words, the proletariat would start to feel disconnected from the power structures of society. And he said this could encourage a sense of false consciousness, meaning that if you were a worker, a proletariat, a have-not, and you listened to the rhetoric of the bourgeoisie, the people who own the means of production, you may think that your place in that society was better than it actually is. And the bourgeoisie had a vested interest in encouraging you to develop a sense of false consciousness, because this allowed you to go about your business every day, going to work at the factory, not questioning your place, not questioning what you had or didn't have in relationship to other people. And it kept you at a level where you didn't cause trouble for the wealthy. What Karl Marx theorized or said or asserted was that you really need to develop a class consciousness. And if you develop a higher sense of class consciousness, then you'll realize where you fit in, and you'll realize your position is probably not that great in the power structure. This would encourage conflict to happen, and Marx saw this as a good thing because he saw this as upturning the existing structure and creating a new structure which would work better for most people. And so Marx said you've got to lift that veil of false consciousness and develop a true sense of where you fit in. Your class consciousness needs to be developed, and once that happens, conflict will occur. Things will get better for most people. Now remember, Marx wasn't really talking about structure per se. He was talking about how the economy of a capitalist society would develop and what we needed to do as individuals to help ourselves and to shift that structure. Now, then Lenski comes along, another conflict theorist from the Karl Marx camp, and he says some additional things about the structures of society. He says that after the Industrial Revolution settles, so to speak, we will live in a post-industrial world where our economic system will be engaged primarily in processing and controlling information. And then he says, after that, he theorizes this postmodern type of society, technologically sophisticated, preoccupied with consumer goods and media images. And so then the question becomes, what happens after stage 4? Well, some people might say, if they're big fans of The Walking Dead and fear The Walking Dead, which I am, the zombie apocalypse. No, I'm kidding, right? There are theorists out there today who have taken that conflict tradition and built on the works of Marx and Lenski, and one of those theorists is Peter Frase. Now, this comes from 2012, and it's a scenario-based approach to what the future might look like. And so Peter Frase writes the Four Futures essay, which I'm going to link for you in this lesson. And he talks about these 4 potential future scenarios that could happen based on where we are right now. Let's talk about each one of these separately. The egalitarian and abundant society, this would be considered Marx's communist utopia. This is where we overthrow the existing system of capitalism and we take complete liberation from work. Robots will do the work. We have automated well enough that we don't have to work because there are robots to do the work for us. We can work if we want to. This will allow us to live a fulfilling life if we do something that we enjoy. And this is the type of society that Marx envisioned when he talked about his communist utopia. So in this type of society, we don't have conflicts based on wages or workers. We don't have a system where the bourgeoisie control the proletariat. Instead, this is an egalitarian or flat social structure. Now, could that work? Could we have a society where every single person has equality with regard to the economy? And the answer to that is really probably not. That's an ideal that couldn't exist in reality. But that is one possibility that Frase offers up in his essay. The second, the artificially scarce, or what he calls the stratified abundant society. This is where the wealthy exercise power and control over everybody else, but we have very scarce employment because robots are abundant enough to do the work that we used to do. This causes problems for the wealthy because we, the rest of us, the proletariat, can't buy things unless we have money, and we can't have money unless we have a job. So if the robots are doing all the work for us, that sounds fantastic, but where do we get money to purchase things that we need? And so what happens here is the structure of society becomes very volatile. And this could create a revolution to move society to another form. So this would be, in my estimation, I believe Frase was talking about a temporary type of structure here with his artificially scarce society. Further, in this type of society, the wealthy are always going to have to be looking over their shoulders, because if the rest of us don't have money to purchase things we need or to get those resources that allow us to live our lives, we're going to become jealous of the wealthy. And we're always going to be looking at what they have, and perhaps some of us will figure out ways to get what they have. And so the wealthy become disjointed from the rest of us, and they're always looking in a cautious kind of way behind them to make sure we're not trying to overthrow them. The third scenario that Frase describes is pure socialism, the fair and scarce society. And this is a middle point between capitalism and real communist utopia. In this type of society, we don't have labor. It's a fossil of an old society. Mechanization allows goods to be produced, but we as humans don't need to do that. Robots will do that for us. Assembly lines will do that for us. However, somehow we all get paid because this is considered a human right to allow us to live our lives to the full potential. So we get wages, but we don't use wages to buy labor from other people. We use our wages to buy resources and trade with others. So what happens in this type of society, because people aren't working, is technological innovation plummets. New goods and services are not produced, and thus scarcity increases. What you have becomes very valuable, and if it breaks, it's not replaced because nobody is working to increase technology in your society. This type of society must have a government to manage and control its resources and to dole them out. And again, it's a temporary type of society with one foot in that capitalist past and one foot in that communist utopian future, and it becomes, again, very volatile. So what happens here is this system, again, has to try and develop itself into a better long-term system that can sustain itself over time, another temporary system. The fourth and final model that Frase comes up with, for me, is the most interesting. And he calls it the stratified scarce society, or the extermination. In this system, the world is very, very heavily stratified. A few very wealthy people control everybody else. And so we've degenerated into a two-class system worldwide, the haves and the have-nots that Marx spoke of, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. We have very heavy automation, and so we don't have to work. Likewise, the wealthy don't need large labor pools. And so to the wealthy, the poor are superfluous. They don't need us anymore. They might need a few people to do services for them, to cut hair, to cook for them, to clean for them, to chauffeur them around. But otherwise, they're really not going to need most people on Earth. And so everybody has a very impoverished existence. And this creates a lot of social unrest. There have been a slew of movies recently that have come out and that have really shown us what the stratified scarce society can look like. The Hunger Games is one of those. There was a film a few years ago called Elysium, where the wealthy lived on a spaceship that orbited the Earth and everybody else was stuck on Earth trying to get what they could for their little lives. There was a movie several years ago with Justin Timberlake, I believe it was called Time, where people only had a certain amount of time to live, but if you were wealthy, you could game the system and get yourself more time. The Divergent series, another really good example. And so this kind of existence where you don't have enough resources to go around and there aren't enough jobs to earn money to purchase resources creates a lot of social unrest. And so Frase says the wealthy have to figure out a way to protect this structure. And there are three solutions that they come up with. They can redistribute the wealth. We do that somewhat today, but the wealthy don't like this solution because poor people are greedy. They want more than they should get. They could insulate themselves. They can barricade their homes. They can hire personal security forces, and they can have drones to protect their security and their property. But neither of those two, wealth distribution or insulation, are long-term solutions. Because eventually what happens is the masses will overtake the few powerful people. And so Frase theorizes that the only solution is that once the wealthy no longer need us, they're going to get rid of us. And his solution is the extermination of unnecessary labor pools of poor people. Of course, that seems drastic to us until we watch The Hunger Games, or until we watch Elysium, or until we watch Time or the Divergent series, or any number of films that have this sort of conflict Marxian theme about how the world is controlled by a very powerful few people. Now, this is only Frase's theory. Doesn't mean it's going to come true, but nonetheless, extremely thought-provoking. It's important for us, folks, to want to think about these kinds of things, because when we do, it allows us to see that our world is indeed socially constructed, and that our relationship to it is a relationship of power or lack thereof. If we want those kinds of things to change, the only way we can try to change them for ourselves and for others is by being well informed and by being open to the ideas of other people. All right, I have to say I like the work of Peter Frase. It really struck a nerve with me, and I've had many conversations with students over the past few years as I've been teaching about his theories in class. And so I believe I'm doing something right by introducing you to this work. All right, we'll talk again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.